shine, this little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine, this little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
The scripture says that they were puzzled, perplexed, and terrified. We can only imagine that morning as they went to the tomb, that they felt some mixture of panic and fear and confusion and indecision. And when they went back with the story that the tomb was empty, their story was considered delusional, even mad. Utter nonsense. Today, Easter Sunday, once again, we get to gather around that empty tomb. And as we gather around the empty tomb, not unlike those first witnesses, probably there are some issues, some complications, some difficulties we have with this whole notion of an empty tomb. So, off the top of your head, and this is the opportunity for participation if you should so choose, off the top of your head, as you consider this whole business of an empty tomb, what are the biggest problems you have in believing in the resurrection? How about the science of it all? Science says that once bodies have died, bodies stay dead. Maybe there's some fabulous medical responses we can do. Those didn't exist in the first century. How about the biblical accounts don't all point in the very same direction? There are several different stories. How about it's just too good to be true? Dr. David Lose, he is the president of Lutheran Theological Seminary in Philadelphia. And he says, if you don't have trouble believing, you're probably not paying close enough attention. This whole idea of an empty tomb and a living, breathing, risen Jesus knocked the socks off of the witnesses in the first century, and it continues to be a mystery to us now. Between the four Gospels and the Acts of the Apostles, there are 12 different resurrection or post-resurrection stories. And none of those stories are identical. Now, for some people, that creates problems right there. They're not identical. The witnesses don't have the same story. Probably lawyers and judges would think that that was a good thing, because when stories line up too well, they're often made up. The 12 stories are not identical. But among those 12 stories, there are two commonalities in each story. The first commonality is no one recognizes the risen Christ at the beginning. They see him, they believe he's a stranger, which gives us good cause to pay attention to strangers and how we treat strangers, what we hear from them, what we say to them, how we welcome them. Nobody recognizes the risen Christ at first. And the other commonality directly related to that one is as as he is revealed to them, that revealing is always personal. Not individual. Not individual in that they get this gift and they get to keep it. It is personal because Christ is revealed to each one of them in a way that makes sense to them, but always to be taken back and shared in the community. So, Peter, he hears the story. He does not believe. He goes rushing to the tomb. And when Peter sees those folded death cloths, it's then that his mind can accept. He is revealed that Christ is indeed alive. And Peter doesn't get to just hold that. Peter will go on to become a leader of the church. He will go through all kinds of persecution. He will land in jail, and yet he will go back out and he will preach in the streets and the towns. And ultimately, he will be martyred because he never recants his testimony of a living, breathing, risen Christ. And Mary Magdalene, she's one of the earliest witnesses, and in John's gospel, she has gone to the tomb. The tomb is empty. She is beside herself. She wanders through the garden and finally comes upon a stranger. She believes the stranger to be the gardener. Sir, do you know where he is? And when the stranger speaks her name, Mary, to her is revealed the living, breathing, risen Christ. And she takes that information right back and becomes the first bearer, the first witness, the first preacher of the good news. There's our friend Thomas. Thomas gets such a bad rap. When Jesus comes and appears among the disciples, Thomas is not there, and Thomas says, I will not believe, even when they tell him the story, I will not believe until I see those holes and touch those holes and put my hand into his side. And the next time Jesus shows up, Jesus' hands, his hole, Thomas touches, Thomas believes. We get this notion, remember we call him Doubting Thomas, that doubting is the opposite of faith. Doubting is actually part of faith. And in Thomas, that is grown, and he is called with the good news and takes the good news to India, where he too is eventually martyred for his testimony. We also have Cleopas. Cleopas and another disciple left Jerusalem on Easter morning. They begin their walk towards Emmaus, and a stranger joins them. And they spend the day chatting with the stranger, telling them about their experiences. And that stranger, in light of that story, reveals what it means in the Old Testament scriptures. They spend the whole day with the stranger, and they talk about their hearts being strangely warmed. And yet it's not until that night, at dinner, when the stranger breaks the bread, that Christ is revealed in that stranger. And they are so delighted and they are so elated that Cleopas and the other disciple who spent the entire day walking to Emmaus run back to Jerusalem to take the testimony that Jesus is alive. Each aha comes to each disciple in a personal way. And whether it's Mary and the other women who run back to tell the disciples, or Cleopas and the other disciple who run back to Jerusalem to share the good news, these personal sightings, these personal testimonies are always intended to be shared in the community. So here we are again at Easter, again in front of an empty tomb. Resurrection? Really? What if death does not have the last say? What if there is a plan beyond death? The very idea defies belief. Martin Luther in the Catechism says, "I cannot by my own will or understanding comprehend or believe the things of faith." And brothers and sisters, we are not left to our own devices. Whether it was those folks in the first century or today, we have a God who gives us those face of God experiences. We have a living, breathing God who comes to us to reveal God's self to us. And on this day, in front of an empty tomb, pure nonsense is redeemed into good news. He is risen. He is risen indeed. Amen.
Well, it's a light in